the Squamish Nation, the village of Oslahan. And I'd like to thank you and welcome you to this shared land of the Squamish Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam tonight. And I'd like to say that I want to put my hands up to all of you who have taken a little bit of time out of your busy lives to come here for a fallen warrior. We have a very long history of shared trauma on this land. And so it's great that we come together to be able to pay our respects to those that have lived their lives and given to our causes. And I like to be able to always try to share a little bit of my heart at things like this and tell you that I stand with you as long as you stand with me.
When Tony was murdered over 10 years ago now, it was a bunch of different moments that came together at once, and it really struck the Vietnamese community, at least from our perspective, because it had come on the heels of what was going on in the United States after Michael Brown was murdered during the Ferguson uprising. And it was just like, you know, it felt like almost every day there was someone else that was being killed by the police. And it wasn't just in the United States, it was also in Canada, across on the East Coast, as well as out here. Tony was not the only one that year. And so a group of us came together as youth and organized a vigil and used that moment as a momentum to support the family, but also try to address issues within our own community, especially around mental health and solidarity across communities in relation to police violence. Tony's sister, she's quite shy. I've invited her every year to come out. And once all the media kind of, once the case closed at the coroner's inquest, I think Leanne decided to just, you know, be private. And so she knows we're here. She's thankful and grateful, but she didn't feel comfortable coming out. But every year, myself and a handful of friends have always come out of the corner just to remind people to remember Tony and talk to people passing by. It's always really interesting. It's actually how we found out that Andrew Peters had run over an Indigenous man a few years after. We were just standing here on the day of Tony's death anniversary, and then, you know, he's like, wait a minute, that's the cop that ran me over. And we're like, what? It turns out a few years after killing Tony, Andrew Peters was drunk driving while on duty and ran over an Indigenous man. Trevor Letourneau became a school liaison officer at Lord Byng. And during his time there was like a breakout of like anti-black racism and transphobia while under his watch. So, you know, we can see how, like, the ripple effects afterwards of after Tony's death, like, things just continue to show how to continue to demonstrate just how terrible the policing system is. These are not honorable people, and one of the things that really, really stood out in this particular incident was the fact that when the police arrived, when Trevor and Andrew arrived at the scene, they shot Tony within 10 seconds of arrival. That's less time than it takes that gives you time to cross this crosswalk. That's how much time it took to apparently de-escalate a situation. Someone who wasn't actively harming anybody in that moment, who, even though there was a a white neighbor who called the police, like, admitted on the phone during that call. They asked him, like, is this person a threat? And he said no. But in any case, no one should ever be shot or killed by the police, regardless of what's happening, no matter how much.
It's not just the police system, it's also the hospital system, and also institutions that continue to push out people who are so angry at how the institution treats them, and particularly Indigenous and Black people. And so when we speak out, and even against in our own communities, we are labeled as crazy, we are labeled as insane. So sanism and ableism are all part of the society that we condemn, or the people condemn people who are insane or mentally ill. And I want to say that respectability politics is what gets us killed too. So when people are complaining about how their lives are not up to standard and how they don't have agency, it's up to us to listen to them, especially folks who are Indigenous, folks who are Black, who are marginalized by gender, especially trans women, unhoused people, people who use drugs, sex workers especially. It is all up to us to not dismiss them, to not think of them as dangerous, and also to check our positionality as well, and especially when we work in institutions, when we get paid, and also that we are responsible for the harm that pushes people further into relying on their doctors or the police to get justice. Because the community gives us justice, it gives us agency, and we love each other in this community in ways that institutions will never love us, in ways that the government will never love us.
Settlers living in this land. I appreciate the people who organized this visual. I really like to say one thing specifically, that the Vietnamese people deserve time of healing. They deserve the time of healing that came through the colonization. First, the French colonized the Vietnam, and next day there's a Japanese occupation happening, and the next day the U.S. imperialism, the war of aggression in the Vietnam, and then today there's another Vietnamese people, migrant to this country, and shot to death by the BPD. The Vietnamese people deserve time of healing. Yes, and from my personal experience, so back in the day when I was in Japan, I grew up there, but basically, I'm a Chinese that live in there. The China has been occupied by Japan, but we live in there, and then one day my mom and me on my way to my home, and then there's like Japanese police stop me and asking me, what's your status, and like, who are you, and then in Japan it's illegal, you don't carry ID card and as an immigrant, but I cannot prove my identity because I don't carry an ID on the time. So I send up to the police station with my mom and waiting my dad to bring the ID card to the police station. That's like my personal experience, and I really like to say that the police violence is really affected everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. So, and also I would like to, before I end this, the Vietnamese people deserve time of healing, and they deserve to be memorized in our everyday life. Thank you.
Have people here heard of the concept of the banality of evil, which is the idea that evil is often not perpetuated through like active sadism or like cruelty, but a passive sense of insensitivity and ignorance where we forget things, and the people who commit actions that harm other people forget the ability to empathize with other people. And I think a lot of the institutions that are around us every day are a good example of this. Like, I've also lost a lot of people to mental health or to the institutions that are supposed to help people with mental health, but instead they can end up spreading more harm. And you can argue that the individuals responsible in these systems may not be actively trying to get people killed, but their ignorance and their negligence stem from like a lack of respect or a lack of empathy to certain factors, and that's what causes all these terrible things to happen, which is why I think it's so important for us to be here in contexts like this to raise awareness, because that's the first step. Like, that then it leads people to question, like, why do we accept systems that were invented, for example, by Victorian England, which is what began a lot of our school system currently, the current government structure, the current police structure that was invented in Victorian England. Like, one of the greatest propagators of like imperialism and colonialism in that period. Like, why do we just accept all this as normal? Even if we disagree with what they're doing, we just go by our days not thinking about it. So I think it is very important that people come out here every year and at least make sure that we remember and to teach new people who may not have known about this. Thank you.
For keeping Tony's spirit alive, and also for all the years of being here, allowing the memory to keep passing on to all of us and teaching us what happened to Tony so that we can continue to fight and continue to remember. I want to actually read Tony's life that his family actually provided a statement for. So I'll just read it. From the family of Phuong Du. On November 22nd, a great tragedy befell our community, one that has made us all question what is right and what is wrong. In the aftermath, a mother lost her son, brothers and sisters lost their sibling, and the world was deprived of a gentle soul. Tony was the second youngest sibling in his family, but looking at Tony, you would never think that he was one of the runts of the litter. His sisters recall many fond memories of their brother playing and having fun as a child, but the most universal part of Tony's presence that he carried over into adulthood was his happiness. His smiles were ear to ear, and his laughter echoed far and wide to the point where you could not help but share in his happiness. Tony grew up in rural Vietnam, where resources were scarce, and you were lucky to have found something to call your own. You would think that this would mold someone to become selfish and self-centered, but it did the opposite for Tony. Ask those who know him best. No matter how little he had, Tony always offered to share with others. That's because he was truly a good person, which in this day and age is in short supply. Tony was a hard worker. He came to Canada with what was in his pockets alone. He had 2 jobs as a janitor, which he worked up until his illness got the best of him. Although he had to quit his job as a janitor, that didn't stop him from cleaning. If you ever been to Tony's house, then you would know that if nothing else, the house was going to be spotless. Not many people would have been able to continue to do the things Tony did while battling such a debilitating illness. But Tony did, and he did so without forgetting who he was, a friend, brother, or person. To say Tony was a family man would be an understatement. Tony had immense love for his family. His relationship with his mother was the clearest example of that. Some would say he was a bit of a mama's boy, but no one can deny that he took care of his mother as best as he could. But his family didn't just include his relatives. No, if you were lucky to be friends with Tony, you would soon realize he treated everybody like they were family as well. It is not by the way in which Tony died that has brought us all here, but by the way he lived. The world will remember him as a kind, gentle, and caring man who will never be forgotten and will now live on in our hearts.